Welcome back to episode 15. We we figured out that it was 15 just a minute ago of Steeler Thoughts and Chief Feelings. I am your co-host, Chris Dorst. I'm the philosophy professor and Steelers fan here.
And I'm your other co-host. I'm Ajay Nair. I am the psychiatrist and Chiefs fan in this podcast. Just wanted to, I guess, address our absence. We've been gone for a little while. I haven't been posting things. I guess it's a summer break, but we are back now, and thanks to all of you that are following along on YouTube, on whatever podcast app you decide to choose and on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram is the other social media site. We're at STCF715 on all of them. And we appreciate those of you who are not bots that follow us because we're definitely followed by a lot of bots on Twitter. I don't know if you've been checking, but I'm
Yeah,
getting
I've
like
checked that
notifications
occasionally.
daily. It's like more bot followers coming up. So
Yeah,
the
I mean,
human followers we
I
appreciate.
the bots we appreciate too, just less, I think. But keep them coming. That's fine. They show up as followers anyway. So. Um, Yeah, sorry for our extended absence. What happened? I don't remember. One of the weeks I was sick, and then I don't understand this, but I still like have not fully kicked this, whatever this is. I thought it was just I thought it was laryngitis, and then it just became a full-blown respiratory thing. Um, or it's just allergies. I don't know. I thought allergies were felt significantly different. But anyway, I got something. So that was one reason we were gone. So I apologize for that. Um,
And
but
the other reason
we're
is
back.
because my daughter has decided not to sleep, so we had to postpone one episode for that reason too. Um,
Well, good. Should so we have do we have anything like pressing to comment on? Otherwise we can get into
I
Chief
don't think
stuff.
so. Yeah, let's get
Did
into
you
the
get new
state of the Chief.
glasses? Is that pressing?
No, these are the old glasses. I just don't have
Okay.
my set. I usually do this without glasses because I get a glare from my light, but I didn't bring my light or anything, so this will not sound or look like our normal podcasts in any way.
Well, that's fair. Yeah, I was thinking I don't remember you usually wearing glasses, but yeah. They look nice. I thought I needed glasses. I guess this is just already a bunch of digressions, but I got an eye test recently. Apparently I don't, but eventually. Does it just like when I just look around, my eyes feel like they're straining all the time, but they tell me that's normal. I don't know.
Really,
Whatever.
that's interesting.
Um, Aging is a weird thing. um, so I have a couple questions on the current state of the Chiefs. Nothing like earth-shattering, but big news: the Super Bowl ring has a typo in it. It lists the Miami Dolphins as the seventh seed, uh, and they were not. They were the sixth seed. Do you have anything to? Do you care at all? Do you have any thoughts about this at all? Aside from, yep, that was a typo.
Yeah, it's kind of it's surprising to me. A lot of money goes into these things, and you would expect that, they were busy counting all the diamonds and having significance for every single gemstone and all, and it's just surprising to me that that went overlooked. Although, to be fair, I didn't notice it until it was pointed out by people online either. It's not, I mean, I saw it and didn't notice it. So, but you'd think if you were like quality control for making, like, how much money do we think they spend on these rings? I don't even know how to ballpark it, but I would imagine that at the bare minimum, every ring is like several hundred thousands of dollars, right? Like more
Oh
than a hundred.
yeah.
Like so, and they give these rings to like, and I don't know if they give like slightly different versions, but it's not just all the players and all the practice squad and all the coaches. Like all pretty much all staff seem to get these rings too, like athletic trainers and even the Chiefs like own media team gets rings. Like so
Like the
like
Twitter manager.
I I assume so. I mean, there are a lot of people that post pictures of Chiefs rings that are associated with the Chiefs, and I'm like, I have no idea who you are or what you do,
Yeah.
you know. So the people that I know for sure, the people that tend the grass, they get rings. Like, so it's a lot of money.
Yeah. And you want so I wouldn't have noticed this either, even though the Steelers were the seventh seed, and you would think if I thought about it for a minute, I would have realized that's wrong. But I wonder how many people in this process like saw the ring and saw the seven there and thought, "Huh, I thought they were the six, but oh, I guess I was wrong," or something like that. Like, I wonder if that was a recurring. But like by this point, if you're asking me to check this or whatever, then surely they've double checked. So I wonder how many, yeah, people thought that was wrong but didn't say anything. Anyway,
And I
um,
know my understanding is that the Chiefs are not going to fix the ring for people. So I guess if people wanted to fix them, they that would be on their own dime at this point.
yeah. Although at this point, I think you lean in, right? You're like, okay, yeah, the ring has a typo. I'm not gonna. Why would you pay to fix that? It's like it's unique now that it has a typo.
That's actually almost exactly the logic that Travis Kelce used when asked about it. He was like, "It's more exclusive. It's got a typo." Like,
Yeah. How many Super Bowl rings have typos?
that's a great question, actually. I don't know. Well, you would think like the probability of typos goes up now because they try to put like a million things in every ring, so more
Yeah.
chances to
The
make
rings just
mistakes.
get enormous. If you got a you know how you can get like replicas of these things. Like if you got a replica, would you want the typo?
Oh yeah,
If
I
you
think so. Yeah,
Would you get a replica? That's a different question. Would you wear all the Chiefs replica rings?
I don't think so.
It would be an interesting choice.
I don't think like I would definitely wear if for some reason I got lucky enough in my life to be affiliated with the organization and actually get a Super Bowl ring, I would wear that proudly. But I don't think I would get a replica and wear it.
Yeah, that's a odd choice. Um,
Well,
because it
actually,
does seem
along
like it's
that
like a thing
lines,
you earn.
yeah, exactly, right? Like yeah, it's like a because it's not objectively a nice piece of fashion, you know? Like
No,
you're not wearing it because it looks good.
no, it looks pretty stupid, right? Objectively.
On a finger at least. Like I don't mind,
Yeah,
they're nice to look at if they're just like sitting somewhere, but like on a finger it looks ridiculous. So,
yeah. Imagine trying to like type with them on or something. You're just like
oh yeah.
clinking your fingers together.
I don't know if you've seen because like we don't they do like a nice job every year when the rings come out of like showing every year's ring. Like I think ESPN does this every year. But one thing that I saw this year that I had never seen before was the Chiefs, Dave Merritt, who's like one of the defensive backs coaches. I think he is the defensive back coach now that Sam Madison left to Miami. He was also on the Giants when they won their Super Bowl rings, and he put his rings together, and it's comical how much bigger the Chiefs rings are than the Giants ring. Like I think it's just like a keeping up with the Joneses thing, and like every year they kind of one up, and like, but the difference in size now is really kind of crazy. Like it makes it look like the Giants ring is like oh, you could actually wear that ring when that's actually an enormous ring too. And so it's weird. I don't know. There's got to be some upper limit here that they're going to reach where they just can't make them bigger anymore.
I mean, they're just not going to be wearable eventually, right? I mean, you could keep, there's a lot of space up here to keep going, right?
Like a tower.
Yeah, right. Uh, but I don't see the functionality being, yeah. I mean, they're already not very functional. Um,
I wonder if maybe the next step is if they make them big enough to have like two loops, so they go over like two fingers instead of one, or like a
yeah,
really wide loop.
but does a one Super Bowl entitle you to two fingers, like
It's a good
two
question.
loops?
Yeah,
I
it messes
wonder.
up things like one for the thumb.
Oh, they should do. Yeah, well, yeah, but if they did like back to back Super Bowls were two loops, and then like back to back to back would be three finger. Yeah, I think they should. The Chiefs should have done that. We're not going to have
But
many opportunities for this, but
to digress further, I remember thinking about this and like I can't believe I still remember when the Steelers were saying like one for the thumb, and that was such a crazy concept to me to be in a position where your team could have won enough Super Bowl rings that you haven't won. And now we are in that position where we're looking for our fifth one. Like I can't like I it crossed my mind because I saw some graphic where they were like, 49ers, five Super Bowls, the Cowboys, five Super Bowl. And I was just like, I, as a kid, you would look at these franchises as like the pinnacles of sport, and suddenly like we are not quite in the like Steelers, Cowboys, Niners, but we're like right there. It's like the Broncos fans used to always make fun of us. They'd be like, "Oh yeah, you guys beat us in the regular season, but we have two Super Bowls," and then they got the third one, and now we have more Super Bowls than the Broncos. Like it's crazy.
Yeah, they're becoming this kind of like storied franchise, like right before our eyes, which leads nicely into the next question I have for you, which is that Kansas is still trying to poach them from Missouri. And just today, I think the Kansas governor signed a bill that was offering a bunch of funds. And this is, I guess, the kind of thing that happens when you are as good over such a long time as the Chiefs have been. Um, but we talked a bit about this before. I wondered if you had any more thoughts about it. I think there are some rumors that Missouri wants to counteroffer, but I don't know. Nothing substantive yet. So,
Yeah,
um, are you still
I,
feeling as pessimistic about the move as if they do move as you
Yeah, I
are?
mean, I wouldn't want it to happen. I'm sure I'd get over it eventually, but just like I had said on a previous podcast, we'd all get over it if the Chiefs change their name. Like I feel like, it you get used to it. But I don't know. I surprisingly care about them being on the Missouri stuff. I will tell you one thing. No one in the entire country is going to have any idea that there's a Kansas City in Missouri anymore if it moves over to Kansas. Because I feel like most people think it's in Kansas anyway. So if the Chiefs move to Kansas, then everyone's just going to think it's Kansas City, Kansas. Which, for people listening,
Yeah.
there is a Kansas City, Kansas. It's just much smaller and less significant of a metropolis than Kansas City, Missouri. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, so it does seem like we're still like very early in the idea about anything actually happening. This is just Kansas rightfully wanting, seeing an opportunity and seeing if they could actually like put together a proposal that would flesh out this opportunity. But I don't know that we're anywhere near that actually coming to fruition, meaning the Chiefs actually making the decision. And it does bring
Mm.
about an interesting, I think this is another one where it's tough for people to have like competing thoughts. But I think one can simultaneously hold the thought that it's gross for billionaires to ask for public funding for a stadium. And it's not actually that much that each individual would be paying when you're talking about like a, you know, 0.3% sales tax or something. Uh, Again, I've forgotten the number. On this podcast, I've said 3%, try like at 3 cents. I've said 3%. I've said 0.3%. You'd think if I was making the argument that it's not very much, I'd actually know exactly what it was. But the 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 point being that like the actual money that they're asking from for each individual resident is really low. And so then I think it's fair if you live in the county to make a decision about whether you feel like it's worth it to you. But I- I think one could be, and I think if I lived in the county, I would be one of these people who would disagree on principle with the idea and still vote for the tax because I'd be like, I don't care to, like, I'll pay a little bit to keep them in Kansas City. This is stupid, but I'll do it.
Yeah. But where, I mean, maybe we talked about this and I'm forgetting, but like, where does the drive to keep them in Missouri, you think, come from? Is it like the Missouri-Kansas rivalry that like you sort of don't want to stomach them, don't want to have to stomach them being in Kansas, or is it something else?
I don't think so because, like, I don't, and if Sonu's listening, he's gonna be so mad that I'm saying this, but I really don't hate Kansas anymore. Like I don't maybe it'll come back if there's like we're in different conferences now. We don't play them very often. They're way better than us in basketball. Even though like cuz now we've started doing like an annual one-off game against Kansas every year. Even like it means nothing except for just the game, like a win-loss. It's not like we're competing in any standings or anything, but maybe if we end up being like a really good team and they're a really good team, then that game will start mattering. Like, I actually care more about the Illinois game that we play every year because we've been like somewhat comparable in quality. Um, yeah, so I don't, and I think being a Chiefs fan, there are a lot of Kansas Chiefs fans. So I think that has helped my perception of the state, like I have some solidarity there. So I don't know. I think it's more of a being from Missouri and having a team in my state versus having antagonism toward the state that it would go to.
Yeah, like you feel some increased, I don't know if ownership, but increased solidarity with the team, having both originated in Missouri.
Yeah, it's like the Cardinals yeah. And even like because in basketball I'm a Knicks fan because Missouri didn't have a team, but now I live in New York. So like there's at least some connection, like whereas, it was weird being a Knicks fan. I do always, and this is like probably a bad quality that I have, but I do judge people that have like completely random associations with sports teams. Like I shouldn't, but I do.
This
Like
is
I feel
yeah,
like
this is yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
I don't feel like you're allowed to start rooting for a team just because they're good, unless you are under the age of like 10, you know? Like, you don't really use logic with that. But if you like are like joining on to a team because like anyone who is born like before the year like 2010 or so, ballparking it, and is a Patriots fan, it's just kind of like, uh, like if you became, I guess my point is,
Like
if
that
you
doesn't live in
became
New England.
that doesn't live in New England, that doesn't have like a dad from New England, that didn't, like if you have some like connection, fine, or if you are a relative of a player or something, fine. But if you became a Patriots fan during their run and you weren't like a young child, I mean, I don't love that, Like, like I
Yeah.
feel like you just get to root for a team because they're good.
Yeah, there's something. It's odd, right? Because it feels like you're cheating. You're like you're reaping without sowing or whatever. Uh,
Yeah.
but on the other hand, it's incredibly arbitrary just to do it based on location anyway, right? So, but maybe that's the point, right? It's you have to. It wasn't. It's chosen for you. It's not something that you choose, uh, and that's somehow part of the point. But I can't quite figure out why that would be part of the point. But yeah, no, like you're not earning it if you're choosing just a good team because they're good.
Yeah,
I
and
don't know.
and I do think like because you have to fall under some to me level of logic as to why you rooted for a team. And I feel like proximity geographically is better logic than they're good, you know? Like
It's in some respect like when like like it's one of the classic arguments like for atheism, right? Is that like, well, look, if you were born in a different country, you'd be a different religion, right? So like, how could that have any evidential bearing on what's right? Now, I guess the question here isn't one of like evidence, and I think there's a good question whether in the religious context it's one of evidence either. But at least here it's not one of evidence, and so maybe you have a stronger case of the connection being less arbitrary, given that you were born in the same in the city
yeah.
or whatever it is.
Yeah, because I feel like I would be more okay with someone just like spinning a wheel with 32 equal sized portions and randomly selecting a team rather than just being like this team keeps winning the Super Bowl. I say that, and I'm not mad at any of the people that have become bandwagon Chiefs fans because I just say the more people that root for the Chiefs, the better. But in general, like I used to get so annoyed, like some guy would be like, and this is like an actual person that I've met, is like from New York and lived New York his entire life, and he's a Ravens fan. And I was like, why? And it's like I was like the Ravens didn't even exist when you were until you were like 9 or 8 or something. And I was like, you can't. What do you mean you're a Ravens fan? Like that doesn't make any sense. Like, how did you? It's like you just like think they're good or they're I don't know. That bothers me for some reason. Like you watch them win a Super Bowl and it's like, oh, I'm. And it also this could be another discussion. We should probably flesh this out in a like a NFL question session at some point. But I would love to hear your thoughts on rooting for multiple teams because I have so many thoughts
Oh
about
yeah,
this. I can't believe when people are like, "Oh, they're my AFC team." I'm like, "What? What? Are you kidding me? What does that
yeah,
even mean?"
yeah. That's a good question. I mean, we're deep in a digression now, so I might as well just keep going here. I'm not sure if I maybe this is something we should also come back to though, 'cause I don't think I have anything really sophisticated to say about it, other than it is maybe a bit odd that like within a sport, it's like the boundaries are strictly within a sport. I have the same intuition with you, but like I can have a favorite team in the NFL and a favorite team in the NBA and root for both of them, and it doesn't. There's nothing bad about that. It's like within. It's like I guess if they're in competition somehow,
Right.
then that's bad.
So I feel like if there is potential for them to play against each other, then you can't root for both of them. Like, and then you could draw up the question, well, what does that mean as far as potential? Because, like, for example, if you root for a Spanish League soccer team and an English Premier League soccer team, they both are competing for separate trophies, but there is a European Champions League that they both theoretically could qualify for, and once every so many years play for that title. So then is that, you know, to me as like a real hardliner on this, I would say then no. Like if you could play each other for a prestigious trophy, you can't root for both teams. At least you can wish well for, I wish well for the Steelers. I want them to win, but I'm not going to claim anything if they win a Super Bowl. You know, and I'm not going to be like, oh, the
Yeah,
Steelers won.
we
My
won the
team
Super,
won
right?
this.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
You get to claim that for one team. You can be happy about as many teams as you
yeah.
want
You
to.
don't speak in the first person. Yeah, if
So,
you can only speak in the first person about one team per
yeah.
sport.
I feel like some people would argue you can't speak in the first person about any team, but I have long crossed that bridge.
Yeah,
Like
that's
that, I'm way down that. The Rubicon was
no,
crossed a long time
I
ago.
it's weird though because I've noticed like when I do it, I tend to say we more often. I identify like I use the first person when it's a good thing, like well we're doing really well, right? And then if we're sucking, I usually say they're sucking. So
Oh, really?
like, I mean like I try to like I catch myself sometimes and I like will change a text or something like that because I use the third person when it was when I should. Oh, but yeah, I feel like that reflects a little bit on me somehow, not in a not great way. So I've been trying to correct it.
That's
um,
funny. I gotta think about. I don't think I do that, but I also have not always been the most self-aware person, so maybe I do.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I I don't. They're my AFC team or they're my NFC team. Like back to that, I don't know. I mean,
Ridiculous.
it does. I mean, but like, what's the analogy there? Like, what? Like, why? It would be like,
Like he's my Republican presidential
yeah,
candidate, and
that's
he's
what I
my
was getting to.
like
Yeah, yeah.
he's my Democrat. It's like what? What does that
It's
even
like, what
mean?
are you talking about? Yeah, yeah. No, you have a position on these things, and that determines it. It's not like, you know,
That's a
yeah,
bad slip. I mean, it's kind of reflective of the way our government is, but it's bad slip that I use the male pronoun for both. Uh, but
yeah.
I mean, I feel like it's
Um,
it's accurate these days, unfortunately. But maybe one day it'll be a
it
case
is.
where one has to think about the gender of a presidential candidate. Or
That would be a very welcome development. I feel like,
yeah,
if anything, the ratio should be flipped. I think that would be a good change of pace. Um, well, to return from a very long digression, um, I have maybe one more question about the Chiefs for you, which is just and I can guess what your answer is going to be because in some sense you maybe have already answered it. But if you had to pick a sleeper player for the Chiefs next year, someone that's like not widely expected to be good and hopeful for their success,
hmm.
but you think will be, do you have an obvious go-to?
I mean, I don't know if he would qualify as a sleeper, but I've definitely talked about how I think Hollywood Brown is going to have a
Yes,
really good year.
that's who I was going to guess.
Like, and the reason why I think it's kind of a sleeper is I think people view him as a deep threat, and I believe he will be an all-around receiver for us. And The big caveat is health because he does get hurt a lot. But I think he'll have like a Juju Smith-Schuster level impact, where Juju like missed a lot of time and still almost had 1,000 yards and was an extreme asset. Like I really believe if Juju didn't get concussed against Jacksonville the year he played with us, he would have gone for about 12 or 1,300 yards. Um, because he not only missed time, but it took him a while to get back, and then he got hurt again quickly. It kind of derailed his season.
Hmm.
But I think Brown, but some people may argue that Brown isn't a great sleeper because uh, he was a first round pick and then he was traded for a first round pick. And even though he doesn't kind of have that pedigree based on like how he played last year or what his stats were, I should say last year, not how he played. Um, some people view him as a valuable asset. So if he were to not count as a sleeper, then I would think I may say um, our linebacker Leo Chenal because we have a surprisingly good linebacker core, which was not the case for most of the Patrick Mahomes era. Well, and we lost Willie Gay Jr., who was a very good piece as like our third linebacker last year, and Leo Chanel's moving into that role. And I think they're going to be really good at using Leo to do things that he's good at, which is being near the line of scrimmage, like penetrating against the run, setting the edge at times against outside runs. And that's how Willie Gay was used a lot. And I think Leo Chanel has a very good skill set there. So I think he is someone who's relatively unknown who will be like, if we make a deep playoff run, he'll be someone that the nation will see a lot, making big plays, splash plays.
Yeah, he's good as a sleeper name because I don't think I even knew his name before you said it. So, yeah. Okay, there you have it. Good. Well, those are all my Chiefs questions. Do you want to do, I think we have to take a break in a little bit here. Do you want to do a quick Steelers question or two?
Maybe we can just see quickly if there are anything we haven't talked since like the end of minicamp. Anything interesting
Yeah.
happen in like OTA minicamp time?
Um, I mean, the only thing really right now is that every time I go on Twitter, the trending thing, like Brandon Ayuk's name shows up in the trending, and it's pretty old at this point. But there was a time I was very excited that maybe we'd be signing him, and now at this point, I just have like this sort of I don't even know if it would be a good move or not. We're gonna have to, if we did, we'd be paying him a lot. We'd probably have to give up significant draft capital for it. And you don't really know like what to expect from our quarterbacks next year. So do you want to be investing so much in a wide receiver at this point? On the other hand, there's the argument that both of our quarterbacks could use all the help they can get, and that would be a lot of help. And we have probably the cap space to do it. So I don't know. But it's always interesting. And sooner or later, something's going to happen. Either he'll sign an extension with the 49ers or make a deal, get traded or something like that. But yeah, curious to see where that goes, I guess. But I don't have anything really pressing about the Steelers since we last talked about them, I don't think.
With with Ayuk, just thinking about the amount of money, like we saw like Jefferson get his contract, and you imagine Brandon Ayuk will at least be in that ballpark, if not, probably not exceeding Jefferson, but he'll at least be within a stone's throw. Given that, what's the most you would give up for him in a trade?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I don't, yeah, this is what I go back and forth about. I don't think, I mean, I would give up a second rounder. uh, um, would I give up a first round pick? I don't know, maybe. I don't know. Again, I just don't, I think it really depends on, I mean, maybe this is the kind of thing that would be like, like if we're willing to do it, then that would tell you something about how we think are like maybe we're that piece away from being really good next year, or at least
Hmm.
how we're evaluating ourselves. Um, notice I'm using we here. Whereas if we're not willing to sort of pull the trigger, I guess I would be curious, like if someone does trade for him, what the value of what they're trading for. Um, but yeah, if we don't do it, then compare it and see like what another team does do it for. I think the Commanders have been brought up in this discussion. So like suppose they traded and we didn't, would we be like that would tell you something maybe about how far you think or they think now it's they how far they think we are from being really good next year. So I don't know. I mean, because I have no idea. I don't think we're going to be very good, and so I don't know that it makes a lot of sense to make a move like that. On the other hand, it would be fun, so I kind of want to see it happen anyway. I don't know.
You would,
From a third party perspective, what do you think?
I feel like a two makes sense based on his value, but I don't know if a two makes sense for the Steelers. The other thing is, you almost feel like trading for Brandon Ayuk might mean that they don't think that Wilson and maybe even Fields are going to be there long term because that's a lot
Hmm.
of money to be on your
Yeah,
cap, and you'd have to pay Wilson if he was going to stay around. I imagine Wilson's not just going to be like, "Oh, sure, I'll play for peanuts." So I don't
yeah.
know.
Well, it might tell you something about like I'm not sure Fields would demand as much of a as big of a
Yeah,
contract as Wilson would after this year. So it could indicate long term plans with Fields, or just that we need to draft someone, and that's what they're thinking. But,
yeah,
um, yeah,
it'll be interesting to see. I feel like he'd look good in that uniform though.
yeah. I mean, I think everyone. Well, I said this last week or last time, but everyone except for like Casey
Casey
Hampton.
Hampton.
Yeah, looks good in the series. Um,
All right.
all right,
Well, maybe let's take a break and then I'll move on with more Steelers questions.
sounds good.
And we're
And we're
back.
back. Oh wow,
Oh,
it happened.
it did. I actually forgot about it, so I didn't even get to feel the tension. I was just ready to go.
I it was like very. I wasn't thinking about it until I heard the recording in progress. I was like, wait, I could do this. And, wow, that was thrilling. Um,
Um,
so we were doing some Steelers stuff, right?
yeah. Oh, okay. So this was to me the main Steeler question of the day. Um, what do you think? I feel like Ben Roethlisberger had somewhat of a complicated status as a leader, even while he was playing. Like, what do you think now about his standing? I think the reason why I was thinking about this is uh, very recently there was some discussion among the Chiefs about Alex Smith and how, these former Chiefs end up being like somewhat like legends that Andy Reid brings back and has talked to the team. And what do you think of Ben's status among current Steelers? And I thought about it specifically in context of the comments he had last season about the offense kind of losing the Steeler tradition. I'm paraphrasing. I don't know why I put up quotes when
Yeah.
I'm not quoting him, but he, and I think Cam Hayward didn't take too kindly to the comments. So he's someone who, on the surface, you'd think is a Steeler legend. Do you think the perception in the current locker room matches that?
I don't know. Yeah, I know. It did seem like he tried to be more of like a leader, especially for the younger players, toward the really late in his career, like last 2, maybe 3 years or so. But it never felt like he really. I mean, maybe the external perception, at least that I had, was that he never really wanted to be a leader. I mean, he was always captain or whatever, but like, what are you gonna do? He's your quarterback and he's a franchise quarterback, so you gotta make him the captain. Uh, but yeah, I don't know that he ever really wanted to, and so I don't have the impression that he was like aside from just having been there for so long, and therefore having some sort of you know which lends, I guess, every comment or every whatever an air of significance. Yeah, I don't know that he really explicitly sought out the leadership role, and I think that's true certainly earlier in his career, right? Like he was not a leader on that team that already had a bunch of veterans veteran leaders, and I think it was probably for a while. I mean, it is hard to know like how much goes on more quietly or whatnot, but um, I do think I don't know. He had some sort of I think he had some private te- tendencies to want more privacy. There are like rumors about him having like a private sort of tiny room by his locker or something like that. I don't know if that's real. It sounded fake when I read it, but who knows where that came from. And he also talked about like frequently, and maybe I'm drawing a connection here that doesn't deserve to be drawn, but he frequently talked about like preferring the no huddle, preferring to call the plays on the field as opposed to having the offensive coordinator call them, because you can see more about what's going on the field, like who might be tired and who might be confused or whatever. Which is all like true, but it does sort of suggest that he wasn't communicating that well with the offensive coordinator to say these things, right? So it does feel like he approached the game in a somewhat private manner, and uh, yeah, so I think that all affects like his perception or the perception of him as a leader or not a leader. And I don't think he's going to go down as like one of the all-time great leaders, team leaders in Steelers history or anything like that. Not like a Cam Hayward or something like
Yeah, and that is interesting too, because I feel like the Steelers, and part of that comes with success, but I feel like the Steelers have more iconic players, at least during my lifetime, than a lot of franchise. Right? When I think of like starting back with the Troy Palomalos and I mean, we didn't really see, at least I didn't really see Rod Woodson on the Steelers that much. He was a Raven for most of my, like when I conceptualize Rod Woodson, I think of him as a Raven. But uh, I don't know. They're like Hines Ward to me still is like the best non-quarterback leader I have seen on any team. It's interesting that, so early on you can almost forgive it because it's like there wasn't space, there were enough people that had enough cachet and were good enough at leading a team that you didn't really need your quarterback to be a leader. And maybe one could argue that Mike Tomlin has such a strong personality that it kind of negates, not negates, but it lessens the need for player leaders to be that uh, effective,
that.
but like later in his career. But I don't know. It's do you feel like the Steelers have more like more historically great leaders than other franchises, or is it just the way we think about the Steelers? And maybe if we were more into the other franchises, then we'd think the same of them.
I think it's so hard for me to evaluate that because I feel like I'm just so much closer to them than I am to other teams that like yeah I can fill out the leaders as it were, but I don't know if I was really into the Raiders, maybe I would have a long list of the
I'm
or
pretty
maybe
sure
they
not
have a
the
good long
Raiders.
list. No, they never
I'm
had
happy to
a
say I'm happy to offer an opinion on that. I don't know about at least not during recent years.
yeah
Uh,
yeah. I mean, maybe you could paint it as like he wanted to lead by example. I think that's how he would suggest, like look, you when it's crunch time, you buckle down or whatever. But I mean, like he was always better in like the hurry up and in the 2 minute,
yeah.
and so uh, I don't exactly know what to make of that, but um, yeah, I think I think that's what he would say. He wanted to lead by example as opposed to be the sort of stereotypically vocal leader.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that makes sense. And so do you think that then he carries the cachet that someone with his credentials should among current players in the locker room?
Um, yeah, I think you. I think yes, and that's because I don't think you want someone with you want like the longtime franchise quarterback to be really influencing that much what's going on in the locker room right now, right? It's and I think that's how it is with him. Not maybe he wants to have more or whatever at this point, but I think he really shouldn't have more. I think that's it's not his team anymore, or insofar as it ever was his team, right? It'll they'll do what they think they have to do, and I think that's good. Now, especially last year, people kept calling for like, oh, maybe Ben could be our offensive coordinator or whatnot. It's like that's, I mean, if they ever see fit to call Ben in to come to be offensive coordinator, then then he can have that leadership role that he wants if he wants it. But but I don't think he does want it, and he's like he indicated on his podcast, he does not want to take the offensive coordinator position for the Steelers. I mean, I don't think he wants to be a leader in that respect. I think he maybe likes to sit back and say some things every once in a while. I mean, he doesn't even do the podcast. I don't think he does it anymore. At least he does it very infrequently. So, um, but yeah, I don't think he's super. He's definitely not right. The He does not have a lot of sway over what the team's doing right now, and I think that's a good thing.
Is he, if you were running the Steelers, is he the kind of guy, like, let's say, it's training camp, trying to set the culture. Would you bring Ben in to talk to the team?
Yeah, maybe I would just because of the aura and a lot of the sort of like imputed greatness or whatever. Right? Um, but uh, but I don't know. I don't know what to expect from that. I mean, he has come. He has showed up at training camp before. I think he did last year. And he's had a lot of like current players on his podcast. Well, a lot, maybe. He's had several. Um, so I mean, he carries some influence, I guess, and I think just like having that future Hall of Famer come talk to the team might be there. It could play a role in team building in some capacity. I don't really know what role. I don't know how to build a team. That's not my area. So, but I could see. I don't think it would be terrible to happen.
And then this is kind of related, but in thinking about this, so I was trying to, when I was thinking about this question, I was trying to think of, because I think of like Alex Smith as like one of those guys that you just like bring in and talk to the team. Like he was always a leader. In fact, he was such a good leader that it overcame a lot of what people would think of as like physical deficiencies in being able to play the sport. And he was so successful. To me, he's like the ultimate example of when, we have talked in previous podcasts about like a winning player. Like he's the ultimate example of someone that clearly there's something there that he's able to do besides his arm strength. And that is, he just does enough of things right that his team can win, even if he doesn't look spectacular while doing it. But then I started
Yeah.
thinking about like other people, like what Chiefs would I think of that? Like, and I kept coming back to like why don't I think of Jamal Charles as that kind of person? And I wonder if it's because his like flame burned too bright too quickly. And like, he was awesome for sure. To be fair, he's not the most eloquent guy. Like I don't know that he's said a lot of things that make me be like, I don't really gotta think about that. So maybe that's part of it too. But I don't know. Are there guys like that in the Steelers that you feel like probably? Because to me, Jamal Charles is someone who like should be a Hall of Fame football player, and the thing that's holding him back, fairly or unfairly, some Chiefs people would argue it's still unfair, is that he just burned too bright. It was too quick, and are there people like that that you feel like kind of are shortchanged either from a leadership or production even or recognition standpoint just because their flame burned too bright too fast?
Um, that's a cool question. Um, I don't know. I've said before. I think that like there's no way Le'Veon Bell deserves to be in the Hall of Fame or Antonio. Well, I don't know about Antonio Brown. That's a weird case. But like if Le'Veon Bell hadn't screwed himself and us, in when was that 2018, and then subsequently. like I think he would have a good case to be a Hall of Famer if things had kept going the way they were going there. Antonio Brown, I don't even know I don't know how to evaluate Antonio Brown here.
Yeah.
He was amazing when he was at his peak, which was for a long time, like 6 straight seasons or something like that, with more than 100 catches. Um, it was so fun to watch play, but I don't know, sort of the off the field stuff just makes it so hard to evaluate his Hall of Fame status. Um, that
And I feel like Antonio Brown too was such a great example of like what must have been amazing player development because didn't it take like till year 3 or 4 for him to start like real massive production?
Yeah, there were like constant reports of him like all like working super hard during in the off season or in training camp and stuff like that. Uh, and then by the end of his career with us, you heard about him like arriving at training camp in a helicopter or something like that. Like it just very much changed. I'm not sure if that was. I think that was him. Maybe that was someone else. Um, but I mean, yeah, I mean, maybe there's a reading of it where like that's what he was working for, right? He was working really hard so that he could do that, so that he could show up to training camp in a helicopter. Um, but whatever, yeah, I mean, he definitely the I mean, there's a whole narrative about CTE with him, that some people read a lot into, and people will even like look at particular hits and say he wasn't the same after this hit. I don't know how much you can isolate a hit as a cause of subsequent behavior changes, um, but it
It's
definitely
also
changed.
it's also just funny like diagnostically that people try to attribute things to a single hit because it's literally in the name. It's chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Like the point is, the argument is that there are several subthreshold hits that build up over time. Like, and that's why I think a lot of neurologists and in general kind of concussion experts get frustrated by the particular focus on just concussion because they're like
Mm,
even subconcussive hits you're getting hit over time, the cumulative effect seems to do something. But that's
right.
another discussion
Yeah.
for another day.
And that's the kind of thing that you would almost expect to be more like, or you expect it more in linemen, right? Because they are getting like these
Right, right,
subconcussive hits a lot more often,
right.
than
Well, and
special team.
another kind of digression, if that I won't go down, but it just reminds me. This conversation reminds me of is as a psychiatrist, I find it like a real slippery slope when people try to this whole attribution of action to mental illness is like a very slippery slope, and it's really difficult to tease out. You know, for example, people can have mental illness and still be doing things that are criminal and not due to their mental illness. I mean, it's actually a very, very complicated field. And I think when people start talking about the potential for mental illness, first of all, just not a great thing to speculate about at all if you don't know, but also just like if you do know, that still doesn't mean that you can attribute specific actions and things to mental illness. It's actually very complicated, and people kind of very broadly talk about these things in ways that are not productive for the individual, for mental health in general, and for society. I feel like.
Do you think is the contrast like if you attribute a particular act, if you flaunt what you should be, the standards you should be using, and you attribute a particular action to a mental illness of some or a CTE or whatever, uh, does that mean that it's not attributable to the person then? And so in some sense they're not responsible for it? Is that like the sort of the standard line that you're criticizing here?
Yeah, I think. Well, so that does become a thing in public sphere, and that's actually like a legal issue too, right? If someone commits a crime while they are actively suffering the episode of a mental illness, like we don't use the term insanity in mental illness, like in mental health, but in the legal system they do, and there is an it's an acquittal charge of not guilty by reason of insanity. And so there are times when legitimately somebody's actions can be excused by an active episode of mental illness. And that doesn't mean that I'm going way down now, but just to clarify what I'm saying, that doesn't mean that someone's really like charged innocent or they're like just off free. What's actually more is that when people that do get not guilty by reason of insanity actually end up having to do a lot more oftentimes than people that are just found guilty. When you're guilty, you just do your time, and then when you've done your time, depending on the crime, like when you've served your time, you're done. But not guilty by reason of insanity, oftentimes people then get hospitalized for treatment and in a state hospital, which is still like confined on a locked unit, like not in society. And then even getting out into society is a very layered, stepwise thing that requires continued connection. And if you ever kind of fall back on those steps, you might get rehospitalized.
Mm.
So for most basic charges, it's oftentimes better to be found guilty than found not guilty by reason of insanity. And people don't know this because like once you're
Mm.
in the system, it's very hard to get out of the system, which is a whole other can of worms. But
Wow, that is, yeah, I didn't know that. I was about to ask, and I mean, maybe we're in the vicinity anyway, but I was the, like judging that someone does, the judgment that someone does not deserve to be found guilty, or is, what is it, not guilty by
by
reason of
reason of
insanity?
insanity.
Yeah, that, I mean, there's a can of worms right there,
Yeah.
right? And
Well, and it's so it ends up being very specific. Like the definition in most states, this is state by state statute, so it differs a little bit. But some states have added in addition to not guilty by reason of insanity, they've added a guilty but insane kind of thing. But leaving that aside because it's too nuanced to that. Even I have limits to my digression. But not guilty by reason of insanity, the idea is that at the time that you committed the crime, so the rest of what you do doesn't matter. It's at the time you committed the crime, you your mental illness at that time prevented you from either understanding what you were doing or understanding the consequences of your action. So it's a pretty high bar that you have to clear. Like it's not so easy, at least theoretically, it shouldn't be to prove that. You need a lot of evidence there to that somebody was really not understanding what they were doing. That's how you get that off. There's a whole different idea of like competency to stand trial, and that's if somebody at the time they're being charged with the crime doesn't understand the legal proceedings, isn't able to participate in their defense in a way that is allowed for by the US Constitution. And so then you have to treat them to the point that they could actually productively participate in their defense. But then they could still be charged with the crime as someone without not guilty by reason of insanity. So, but that NGRI on not guilty by reason of insanity is very specific about like you really have to have not understood what you were doing or not understood the ramifications of what you're doing at the time to qualify for that uh,
yeah, and that
rule.
does seem incredibly hard to prove. I mean, just from my armchair here, which I'm literally sitting in an armchair, but yeah, like you could understand it later, but the question is whether you understand like that. I don't know how one evaluates that.
It's
Uh,
a very detailed process, and like most things, it's imperfect. But yeah, there's a lot of fortunately like that's oftentimes law enforcement are involved and they have to document a lot of what they do. Now body cam footage becomes very helpful that exists.
mm,
So you can get some ideas of what the person was doing, what they were saying, and then you do actually like go through treatment records and stuff to try to compare what's that like compared to what they normally do. And we know what they look like when they're having an episode. Does this look like what it did look like? So you start
oh
putting
yeah,
pieces together like that.
yeah. Uh, that is uh, that is fascinating. uh, in a way, yeah. I mean, in a way that's like, because sometimes, like, so I guess the thought would be like, are they exhibiting behaviors? I mean, we're real in a digression right now, but whatever. Are they exhibiting behaviors that are characteristic of episodes for them? That's that we're trying to evaluate essentially.
And
Uh,
for the population at whole, like we have some certain ideas of how certain mental illnesses present. Obviously things are different for in many different cases, but there are a lot of things that this field is forensic psychiatry, that forensic psychiatrists are taught and that all psychiatrists should know in theory about how ways that things don't present or things that are neurologically impossible, and there are a lot of, so they do a lot of trying to tease out like what makes sense, what doesn't, and then a lot of record review about how consistent these things are, whether it fits with our conception of how these things work. It is
Hmm.
a it is a pretty extensive process, but like everything, it's not as perfect as we'd like it to be. It's not.
Is this the kind of thing where, okay, like I have like maybe one more question about this, and then I'll try to stop digressing it, but we'll see what your answer is. Is this the kind of thing where you would want knowledge of the sorts of typical behaviors characteristic of this kind of mental illness, or even in this individual patient, like that kind of knowledge, you would not want it to be too widespread so that people could use it to their advantage, right? Given that there could be advantages to being declared, to having a mental illness and this being an episode of that mental illness, right? So is this the kind of case where you want that to be sort of like special expertise, and only people with those special expertises have, with that special expertise, have the knowledge of like what are the characteristic behaviors here?
Yeah, theoretically, although it's all public knowledge if people want to look it up. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, but I think this is one of those situations where it's hard to explain, and I wonder, I don't know if there's a parallel in philosophy, but it is interesting how much people think they can understand about a medical field by just like reading. And there's actually a huge gap between someone who has just read a lot about something and someone who has practiced. Uh, I'm oftentimes really surprised at the questions I get from very smart patients I have that think that you know, they hear these terms and they try to utilize them, and they are very capable people. And I imagine they look like what I would have looked like if I hadn't gone to medical school and practiced and would be talking about things. But so it does give me some faith in the medical education system that, like, okay, like lay people are not coming up with, so by that point, there are a lot of people that have read a lot of things about what psychiatrists are looking for, and they try to mimic those things, but it's actually really hard. It's very hard.
So you have to be a psychiatrist to be able to fake a mental illness, essentially.
And a really good actor. Like, it's
Yeah.
both, right? You have to be able to
Okay.
act really
Yeah.
well too.
I guess we're getting into like Silence of the wasn't Hannibal Lecter like a psychiatrist or something
Yeah,
like that?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There we are. Okay. We just got to the premise of Silence of the Lambs. Part of the premise. Okay. Well, anyway, that was a good digression. In terms of digressions, that was a fun one.
And I don't think that this necessarily needs to be said based on what I said, but just so that people know, I was not at all giving any psychiatric advice to anybody. I don't think it came across like I was, but just in
No, I
case.
don't think so. Yeah, but okay. So to maybe put a bow on this, let's not, and we are not going to try to diagnose Antonio Brown. Um,
Right.
a whole history of, a very interesting career, and I will say no more.
Right.
Good.
All right. So
Should we?
yeah, that's what I had for Steelers questions. Did you want to get into some general NFL?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I have a couple of questions. Do you want me to go first here?
Yeah, yeah.
We can alternate like we usually do. So, um, I was, as I am wont to do, musing a fair bit about whatever. But at this point, I was musing about your criterion for. Well, I guess one question is whether it's your criterion for knowing a person or criterion for evaluating a person. Um, I don't know how different those are, but uh, namely, you look at how they treat people that they have sort of nothing to gain from. Essentially, is that am I capturing it right?
Yeah, I guess let's say evaluating, because knowing seems like a very large term, but I haven't thought through how I would differentiate knowing and evaluating. But knowing seems like a bigger claim than evaluating. So,
Yeah, and it also feels very nebulous, right? And
right.
one can know a person and of a lot of different. a lot of different capacities. Okay, so here's my worry about that approach, and worry. I use worry here in sort of the academic way, like no one really worries about that. That's not like a genuine worry, but uh, so actually, do you find this? I don't know if you have the same sorts of like in philosophy, or not just in philosophy, but I guess more in philosophy, at least that I'm aware of. We have these like sort of terms of they're not really terms of art. They're just terms that get thrown around a lot, like worry being one of them. Like someone gives a talk and you have a question, like here's my worry, as if like it's deeply concerning to you, but it's not. It's like no, I think there's a problem with your view, and I'm going to try to point it out. That's what I have here. uh, so I'm not even sure this is a problem. You can tell me if I'm wrong, but suppose we're evaluating me and we're looking at how I treat people that I have nothing to gain from. And so I treat some people better than other people, I guess. I suppose this is probably true. Um, and uh, is it conceivable? It's, at least in principle, it's inconceivable that maybe I treat the people that I have nothing to gain from way better than I treat the people that I do have something to gain from. It's conceivable, but I think that if we saw me doing this, I think the natural reaction would be, I guess Chris views those people, namely the ones that he treats better, as people that he has something to gain from. And namely the ones that he treats worse, we think of them as people he doesn't think he has something to gain from. And so in that case, it looks like if I treat different people better than other people, the criterion of like how does Chris treat people that he doesn't have anything to gain from, used as to evaluate my character, it's going to sort of select for
The people you
bad people.
treat.
Like it's going to lead you to evaluate people poorly, right? Just because the people that I treat less well are going to be deemed the people that I think I have nothing to gain from. So how do you get around that? That's the gist of the worry.
But I guess that's assuming then that there's no way of at least not objectively, but semi-objectively or somewhat in an informed manner determining who one could have something to gain from.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, right. So you're thinking
because
like you could just like
we could,
look at the position Chris occupies, right? Like he's a professor. He needs his students to like him, so he gets good student evals, right? He has something to gain from them, like that kind of thing, right? So, like, given your position, your societal position, there are ways to tell who you have
there's,
something to gain from.
or at least approximate, with enough confidence that a judgmental person like myself would feel okay passing some sort of judgment. um,
That's fair.
Yeah, and I don't think that I would say that this method of evaluation is dispositive, but I think it gives you a window. I definitely am someone, and this is sometimes something that I get into arguments with my wife about. I'm definitely someone that's perfectly fine with delivering a harsh judgment about something that I'm fairly certain about, but not certain about, and then changing my mind if giving new information. I don't feel bad about that because it's like, when I knew what I knew, I feel like that was a reasonable opinion. Now I know more. Now I feel like this is a reasonable opinion. But I don't mind being like, I don't think, based on what I have seen, and maybe this is just too much confidence in my own perceptual abilities, but based on what I've seen, I think that this person, Chris, has nothing to gain from that person. So I feel pretty good about evaluating their interaction. So yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, yeah, I think it would be harmful to use that method to be dispositive, but I would say that about most things. If people have certainty about a lot of things, I'm very skeptical of those people. Yeah, it's judgmental right there.
that's good. Okay, yeah. No, I think this is. I was wondering if this was the sort of the response, right? That there are definitely ways that one can get a grip on at least a solid idea of who someone has stands to gain from, basically. Um, but probably it's like it's different in different cases, right? And I think maybe like later in life, it's often less clear who you stand to gain from, right? Like earlier in your career, you're trying to like make it, and you're trying to, uh, become a star quarterback or whatever you're trying to get tenure, whatever it is you're trying to do. And then later in your career, it's like, I don't like you probably give fewer, uh, uh, F's. I can say that, right? About all these things, and so uh, and then I think from an external perspective, you have less read on sort of them as a person because you don't have this lever or this not lever, this indicator of like who they're because like oh they don't stand to gain anything from anyone basically, or it's very few people that stand to gain anything.
So then you
It's
can
not clear
evaluate their
who.
actions with everybody, pretty much.
Yeah, yeah, I guess that's right. Uh,
Maybe that's why some people become really crotchety when they're old. That's because their true personality comes out because they don't need anything from anybody.
yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe that's what's happening. That's it, that's internally a consistent story here. I like that. Um, because it's not at all. I realized like partway through this, it's not all at all NFL related. But originally the question was like, how do you know Mahomes, or like, how would you know Mahomes, right? And so just to make it clear that this is not, this has some relevance to the topic of our podcast. um, but I mean, Mahomes is a case where it is like fairly clear like who he stands to gain from our perspective. I mean, at least you would think so. Now, if it turned out that he was treating the people that we expect him to have something to gain from very poorly, and vice versa with the people we expect him to have nothing to gain from, then maybe we would. I mean, that would be interesting, right? It would lead us to reevaluate like what his priorities are in some sense. Um, so I think that's all just. I think I. I think that none of this is like questioning your criterion. The more I think about it, it's interesting.
Well,
Um,
and what else I feel like is interesting is on, especially when it comes to like sports leadership, there's some expectation for whatever reason, and I would argue exists more in this country because of what we have as a value system in the United States. But there's some expectation that our athletes as leaders have a little bit of an edge to them, right? So then it kind of blurs the line between treating people well, badly, and being a leader. And I don't know what to make of that. Brady throws a tablet, and people are like, "Look at that man! What a leader!"
yeah,
And
yeah,
if my daughter threw a tablet, I'd be like, "What the heck are you doing?" you know? So it's weird how we get. I was thinking about it because I was listening to an interview recently with Andy Reid. I don't know if you've seen the State Farm commercial where Andy Reid is involved and they're sitting in a fast food restaurant and
I don't think so.
they're sitting at a fast food restaurant and they're using bits of fast food to explain bundling home and auto for Andy Reid, Mahomes and Jake from State Farm. And Andy Reid just keeps eating all their food is the premise of the thing. Every time they try to use something to explain, and so then he ends by saying like, okay, explain to me one more time with those nuggies. And he says nuggies, which is amazing. And then Mahomes refuses to give it to him. But anyway, apparently while filming that, Andy Reid was taking pride in the fact that he was not using the spit bucket with burgers because he loves cheeseburgers. He's like, but he said after we did about 60 takes, I had to start using the spit bucket. And then he started talking about how they wanted him to do some takes while he was chewing, but he ended up like spitting food at them. And he said Mahomes was the one that made the call, like, nope, we're not doing that. Like, which I find really interesting. Like, I can't imagine being with Andy Reid in a shot and being the one that's like, nope, I don't want to do it this way. Like, but some people view that as leadership, which I tend to agree with in that situation. Maybe he's that comfortable with Andy Reid, but others would probably view that as arrogant. That like you're with the coach and someone with much more experience, and you're trying to call the shots here. It's
Yeah,
nebulous.
that's a strange setting too, because like now that you're in this, like all the sort of the hierarchical structure of the team is not there,
Not there.
or at least it's. I mean, if it's there, it's like it's imputed, right, by the viewer or but yeah. So suddenly, like the power structure is different, and Mahomes can act different. Yeah, that's cool. And so it depends on like yeah, I think it depends on whether you're still thinking of them as player and coach, how you're going to evaluate that action.
Yeah. And even if you did think of it as player and coach, maybe that's okay because it's your
Yeah,
quarterback growing in his, so it's very easy to view these things multiple ways, unfortunately, which makes
yeah.
evaluation difficult.
No, that's good. And I know we have to take a break very soon, but I would, yeah, maybe we'll just take a break. I was going to pick up on what you just said, but that could be a long digression, so we'll leave it for another time.
All right. We'll be back soon. Well, instantaneously for those of you listening. And we're back.
And we're back.
All right. So the NFL question that I wanted to ask you today has to do with the oft discussed quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. And it kind of has to do with what we have talked about before. I think we mentioned it in our Butker discussion, among others, about whether a player's value on the field merits whatever off the field distraction that they're providing, and that usually star players can get away with more. And I think Aaron Rodgers is a good example of this, regardless of what your beliefs are about what he says. He definitely says a lot of noteworthy things that get a lot of attention. And he has been such a productive football player. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like this really started like post COVID. I don't remember hearing a ton of his viewpoints before then.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that's right.
so, after the whole immunized thing, when he said he'd been immunized, knowing that he was not vaccinated, and I hate it when people try to be like, well, he said he had been immunized. It's like he knew what he was doing. Like, come on. Like, why are we being this stupid when we're trying to discuss this?
Yeah, it's
Um,
almost like more damning that he did though. Like the reason he chose that word is because he knew he could use that word and not be like strictly lie. So it's almost like you're being more misleading by doing that.
well, and like the argument being that, oh, he knew that if he was gonna just said he was unvaccinated, that he would be getting a bunch of Carson Wentz, Josh Allen, Kirk Cousins, Harrison Butker. All these people have been, I don't know why I started with Carson Wentz. It just came to mind because he's a Chief. But the other three, fairly prominent people that have been prominent in the media a lot recently, does anyone bring up their unvaccinated status? Like, does anyone talk about that at all? Like, even with Josh Allen, like, we heard about it and then it just like life moved on. His teammate, Cole Beasley, who was like really, really vocal, he got a lot more flack than Josh Allen did. Like you could have just said you're unvaccinated and move on with your life. Like that's what happened to a lot of players. A lot of NFL
Yeah,
players stayed unvaccinated. Anyway,
yeah.
I'm already digressing in the middle of my question. But do you think that I was thinking about this when Robert Saleh, this was what just over a week ago, was talking about how Aaron Rodgers had an unexcused absence from minicamp and then had to kind of walk that back and be like, well, we're on the same page and it's not a big deal. But he did clarify that it was unexcused when directly asked. So I don't know why he did that. But with things like that, with the whole Pat McAfee situation where he made statements about Jimmy Kimmel and then had to walk it back, and then he was not appearing on Mondays anymore on McAfee, and then they brought him back, and rumors of a vice presidential run with Robert Kennedy. Like, I don't know. Do you think Aaron Rodgers, and having missed the entire last season with his Achilles injury and having to come back from that, a different status, and his previous year in Green Bay was not like his 2 years prior. Are we getting to the point where Aaron Rodgers might be more of a distraction than value to a team?
I mean, it's easy for me to say it, given that I'm a Jets fan and I don't care how they do next year. But yeah, I would say yes. I would have. Yeah, I would have said that probably for several years when he was still a Packer too. I mean, I just think like this is not worth it. And I guess I say that like right? Like I'm sure there is a charitable reading of Aaron. We just call him Aaron. Uh, one that sort of makes sense, makes him make all these decisions seem more I don't know, humanizing or something like that. But I feel like at this point, it's really hard to find that reading, and given that he is, you know, yeah, I think as, in terms of team building, he's not worth it anymore. Now I don't know. I mean, maybe I would feel differently if I was a Jets fan. I mean, I made many excuses for Ben Roethlisberger as a Steelers fan. So, uh, there's, but from my perspective, yeah, I don't see why one would be putting up with this. What do you think?
Yes, especially as, you know, I do think it's being underrated how much weight we're putting on somebody coming back from an Achilles at his age, you know. It not that it couldn't be something that's successful. I mean, Terrell Suggs came back from an Achilles in like 9 months or something insane like
Yeah,
that, and he was in the prime of his career and a freak athlete. So, things are different. And it does, when Sonu was on, we were talking about how there's not a great history in basketball. There's a long history in basketball with very few exceptions of people's careers changing after an Achilles, even when it happens young. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. Like Eric Berry's career ended after an Achilles, so that's in the forefront of my mind. And he was, what, 29, 30. I mean, it's not like he was like 35, you know.
yeah, right.
Um, so
Yeah,
I don't know. When you hear this much noise off the field, like then you start wondering, like, what production are we actually expecting out of this guy this year?
yeah. And how much would he have to produce for us to be like okay with this, right? Like this is,
Hmm.
uh, um, I mean, you basically, I mean, if you like, what's like the realistic ceiling for them? I don't know. Maybe they make the playoffs and lose in the wild card or divisional. I mean, divisional seems like the ceiling, maybe. And maybe I'm underrating them, but it's like, and that's I don't think it's worth putting up with. Like,
And
I would be
and
done with them.
and I would add too that and I'm making an argument that, and this is why I feel like nuance with these arguments is so important. Most arguments of this type that are made, I do not like. And I'm sure people that disagree with me will say that the reason why I'm making it in this instance is because Aaron Rodgers is someone I don't like. But it has been a long time since we have seen Aaron Rodgers, even before he was doing this kind of stuff, produce something meaningful in the playoffs. I'm not pretending like I have an answer for why that is, but like at some point you're building a pattern here. Like for as amazing as the 2010 playoff run was when they won the Super Bowl, I mean, he's kind of looked like he was the 90s Chiefs since then, you know? Like he's lost a lot of games where they're favored. They lost a lot of games in Lambeau. I mean, before Rodgers with Favre, one of the big things was like the Packers don't lose in Lambeau in December and January, you know? Like that was the impression, at least of me. I haven't gone back and looked at it, but that it felt like was what we believed. And
Right. Yeah.
and you see like warm weather teams like the 49ers come into Lambeau and beat them. It's not that's actually to go separately on a digression. Like, it is interesting because the 49ers always seem to beat Aaron Rodgers in the playoffs, and Aaron Rodgers has that famous quote about because the Niners were drafting number 1 the year that he didn't get drafted first overall and he fell into the 20s. And he has this like very angry quote on that day where he's talking to a reporter about how like he's going to make them pay and make everyone pay that passed on him. And I remember like watching that before the Colin Kaepernick game when Kaepernick like destroyed the Packers and being like, oh man, the Packers are going to win this. Like Aaron Rodgers is so mad. Like they're going to, and then it's just funny. Not that I blame that loss on Aaron Rodgers, but it is funny that that is the team of all teams that seems to beat them a lot. But one could
Yeah.
argue that like there wasn't a hope for a very high ceiling for the Packers before because again, I can't explain it, but for some reason he's not that quarterback that is because to me when things get tight in these games like and I can speak out of a position of a little arrogance now with having Mahomes but like it just does seem like there are certain quarterbacks that manage to figure things out. Like when it's really tight. It's not like they've been getting blown out. At the end of Roethlisberger's career, like his defense was giving up like 30 plus points in the playoffs routinely, and
Yeah, even 40. Yeah.
even 40. So it's a little different. But when you're losing on last second field goals and stuff, it's then you start putting a little more weight into the quarterback's contribution. I feel like,
Mm,
and so anyway, that being said, that is to say that even when he was really wheeling and dealing, his teams weren't winning the way we kind of expected them to, even though he had some really good regular season teams. And
yeah.
now he's coming off an Achilles and a subpar season with the Packers before that, and he's getting more vocal. So we're having a diversion here of like distraction going up and production coming down. So you
Yeah.
wonder
I
if
mean,
we've have crossed that point.
there is like, as you brought it up, I mean, there's this interesting sort of trend of quarterbacks who, I mean, maybe it's not a trend. I'm thinking of like a couple, very few data points here, but quarterbacks who like won Super Bowls and looked very clutch earlier in their career, and then like later just could not get playoff success. Essentially, like Ben Roethlisberger being one of them, Aaron Rodgers being another. I don't know if you would put Drew
Russell
Brees in that
Wilson.
camp. But yeah, Russell Wilson. Um, so there's a I don't know exactly what to make of it, but a lot of them, they looked very clutch, especially in like at crunch time earlier in their career, um, and then they just can't produce later, and I don't know exactly what to make of that, uh, but yeah, I think it's a definite. Well, I don't know if it's a trend, but having just cherry picked a couple examples, it's a trend among the examples I cherry picked or we cherry picked there. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't. I think exactly like how much. I think that should definitely inform how much you're tolerating all these off-field distractions that Rogers is bringing to the table. And I
Well,
mean,
I
I don't have much.
remember this was probably hard for me to estimate the exact timeline, but maybe it would have been around like 2000. I honestly don't remember, but I remember reading this article about this was definitely before Brady's last set of three Super Bowls, so it had to be before 2014. But there was an article talking about how it was interesting how differently we viewed Manning and Brady's careers as far as clutchness, because Brady had the clutch success early and then had a lot of losses in the playoffs. And Manning had the losses in the playoffs first before he won his first Super Bowl. And that narrative seems to be so important.
Yeah,
Early on, you develop the narrative, and then it doesn't really matter what the results are later. Um, I found that interesting.
yeah. You wonder like how much of that is just sort of statistical noise, right? Like that you would expect some people to have the success earlier and some people to have it later, and it's not actually that strange that someone like Ben Roethlisberger or Aaron Rodgers can't win many playoff games later in their career because that's sort of the expectation, and or just averaging out essentially. But
What do you? I'm looking this up right now, so I'm curious what you think Aaron Rodgers' playoff record is since he won the Super Bowl against the Steelers.
um, can you ballpark me like the number of games?
It's 16 games, so you think of it
16
as like
games.
an old football season.
Yeah, maybe 9-7,
7-9,
8-8. Okay, all right. Yeah.
7-9 in the playoffs since then. He so and again, like I generally really hate the arguments about like just calling someone a winner, but as we've established, like definitely players do things that contribute to winning and losing. And when you're the quarterback, when you have built a very long track record of wins and losses, I do think that's becomes a valid stat to use. It's not as like oh, you know, in this game, quarterback X beat quarterback Y in this game, so they're better. No, but when you have a 16 game sample of going 7-9 in high leverage games, like I think that's meaningful. Like
Hmm. Yeah, you're not getting it done, and surely you had some like you know crunch time opportunities there, and it didn't get done at a very good rate. Yeah.
And yeah, there's some games that are, they lost by a lot and the defense didn't hold up, and that's fine. Those aren't a big deal. But then there are other games where it's like there were high leverage situations where you could have made plays and you didn't. And when you get that large of a sample size, then it become and the weird thing is like this when this started, this track record, he was considered like the best player in the league, you know? He
Yeah,
remember they went
he was having those
15
like,
and 1 and won the MVP and
yeah,
I mean
throwing like
this
45 touchdowns and 4 picks or something like that, like
yeah,
crazy.
like and he's at least won the MVP in 2011, 2020 and 2021. I don't remember off the top of my head if there's another one that I'm missing there, but I know for sure he won those three during that span. And he's gone 7 and
Jeez.
9 in the playoffs.
Yeah.
The guy I feel really bad for is Robert Saleh because I don't know how to know if he's a good head coach. you know, he's had
Yeah.
such bad quarterback play, and then he gets Aaron Rodgers, and they've drafted well. They've developed a good defense, and then he's got Aaron Rodgers. He tears his Achilles. Now he's coming back from his Achilles, and there's all this whirlwind around him, and we don't know how good he's going to be. Like Robert Saleh might get fired after what, like 4 seasons on the Jets, and us having no idea whether he's a good coach or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, that's, I mean, that's how a lot of this goes, right? I feel like your career is, I mean, I'm thinking about Kenny Pickett in Pittsburgh. I mean, similar story there, right? Like he had one game without Matt Canada, an offensive coordinator, and now he's gone. Like, and now he's a backup quarterback. And I don't know. This is just like there's so much about your career that's up to chance. You really need to like seize any opportunity you're given, um, no matter what the circumstances are. Somehow, but I don't know.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Well, it does, and this does seem to happen a lot with the Chiefs, which I don't know if what to make of it. I get confused every time, but they're like Anthony Hitchens is the last player I can think of, the middle linebacker. He went from starting and playing like the vast majority of snaps with us. When we cut him, he didn't play another snap in the league. And like Eric Berry, it's weird that these players go from these like vaunted starting positions with us, and then we get rid of them, and then like nothing. You never hear. And so then it's like, should we have been playing them that last year? Like, I don't know. What does that mean? Does that mean
Yeah,
that like, I don't know what to make of that.
yeah, yeah. That's the kind of
Like,
you
what
never
if
know.
Pickett
It's you
never
never know.
throws another pass? Like, what would you make of that?
It might very well, and like, and there's two incredibly different ways to read, well, like to evaluate him, right? Uh, and we just don't have the data for. I don't know, and that's just it might just be the way it ends, right? Like it's tough. Right? I don't know. It's a tough world.
Well, now like watch Aaron Rodgers like have a mediocre regular
Yeah.
season, then just kill it in the playoffs. Just like take out Mahomes in the AFC title game, like throwing 4 touchdowns, and that.
If this
Please don't
happens,
let
we'll
that
do
happen.
a yeah. What? Wait. So if Pat Fryermuth with his first team All Pro, I'm smashing my face in a cake. Is that right?
I think you
Is that
said
what
first or second,
Forced?
first or
Okay. Right.
second.
All
Yeah,
right. Okay.
yeah, and
If Aaron Rodgers takes out Mahomes in the AFC title game, you got to do something.
um, well, you can suggest it. I suggested the cake, so
Okay. I mean,
you
the
know
cake's
what?
not bad. Yeah, the
I'm
Eagles
gonna
cake.
be even more bold than that. If Aaron Rodgers has a winning record in the playoffs, then I will do so. If he wins more playoff games than he loses, I guess that's a little tall to ask because you can max have 4 playoff games. So that
Yeah.
means you have to get to number three in order to have a winning. All right, if he should I say if he wins a playoff game, that's
That's a
fine.
little
If
bolder.
Aaron,
Yeah.
yeah, I know that is bold. It's how bold do I want to get? Uh, well, we can have stages. How about this? If he wins a playoff game, I'll do something, and if he beats Mahomes in the title game, I will do something way more absurd. You can decide both of them.
Okay. Oh gosh.
Please
Well,
be
one's gonna be the
considerate with the
cake.
appropriateness.
Yeah. Um,
Hopefully, you're not going to say like, if he wins a playoff game, I have to kill myself because that would be tough.
no, nothing like that. But like, how feasible would it? Could you? Do you think it would be feasible to smash a watermelon with your head?
I don't think so. At least I could. I mean, I know people can, but I don't know that I could.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So no watermelon smashing. Um, well, maybe this is good. Okay. So if he wins a playoff game, you smash your head into a cake. Uh, if he beats Mahomes in the AFC Championship, what if he just beats Mahomes? What if it's like the divisional round? What if he beats Mahomes in the divisional round? Is that what you? I
That's
can't remember what
fine.
you said.
I said the AFC Championship game, but I think it's fair that I should have to do something if he beats the Chiefs. So any round of the playoffs, if he knocks the Chiefs out of the playoffs, I'll do something.
I gotta think about that. I was gonna say you vote for him if he's vice president. You vote for his, but that'll be after the election, so it won't
That would be funny.
matter. um, yeah, no. I'll think about that next week. We'll launch the podcast with what Ajay has to do if Aaron Rodgers beats Mahomes in the playoffs.
All right. Well, with that, should we get on to our anecdotes then?
Yeah, that's good, and that's what we'll look forward to. I'm gonna come up with something good here. Do you want to go first? I don't know who went first.
Okay, I can go first. Um, so we this goes back to CIS. I'm gonna just keep going back to this well over and over again. For those that are uninitiated, CIS is Columbia Independent School, where we spent our sixth through 10th grade years. And for the first, was it 2 or 3 years that we were there, we would go on a retreat that was in like southeast Missouri at a YMCA Trout Lodge. Um, I don't
Yeah,
remember if we went twice or 3 times. I think we might have
it
gone
was at
three
least
times.
twice.
I think we went three
I think
times,
one
and
time
then
we had the retreat at like a local place.
yeah, I think that started our ninth grade year, I want to say. Because that was after, remember the leadership change that happened? I think that happened before our ninth grade year. Also, when
Yeah,
we
yeah.
started newspaper. Um, as a callback to,
What a good year.
yeah. So, so we would stay at this trout lodge. They would book out like a bunch of rooms, and we would all stay together. And they would do like activities during the day, and we would have some free time. And if I remember correctly, it was like a long weekend. We'd be there, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or something like that. It was several
Right.
days. We might have had 2 full days there or something. Like arrive one day, have a couple days, and then leave, something like that. Anyway, uh, you know, actually, I'm going to make this back-to-back stories. So next week we're going to follow up with more Trout Lodge. But the first story, like, so you have a bunch of like junior high and high school kids and a bunch of faculty that are trying to make sure that they don't do anything stupid. And we had these, I remember we basically, the rooms would be like beside each other, and there would be balconies like behind the rooms with like basically like little separators between them. And so one of the big rules, they would have like a chaperone sitting out on the deck in the back looking up and making sure people weren't like jumping from balcony to balcony to go into different people's rooms. We'd have a curfew, they'd make sure we were in our rooms. They would have people like in the halls, like sitting in the area, and then people like out back looking. And I remember there being like a really big commotion. I can't remember. I think it was our second year there, our seventh grade year, and it was a really big commotion in the middle of the night. We didn't know what was going on, and uh, they like I can't remember now. You know how fickle your memory is. Like I don't remember if someone came into our room through the balcony. Like I have a memory of seeing this person. I don't remember if we saw him go by or if they stopped at our. I don't know why it stopped in our room. We weren't like I don't know. But anyway, like someone was jumping across the balcony, and then it became like a big deal the next day and all that. And I remember the excuse the next day. I don't know why this caught me as in hindsight, I feel like the reason why it's so funny is because now knowing the person, I feel like maybe this is actually true. But the person was like, I was so confused. Like I thought they meant we couldn't jump off the balconies. I remember at the time, like and this was not like a little drop. Like this would have been like 15 feet. This was like break your ankle kind of drop if you jumped off the balcony. But I remember that being the excuse and being like, what? Like, at the time, I just thought the person was lying, but then getting to know that because we were in seventh grade, but this was a new student that had come, so we didn't know this person at all. But
I asked
after
whoever this
having
was. I
done,
don't have the memory. I don't have this memory, so I'll ask you
I
after the
yeah,
podcast.
I'll tell you after the podcast. But now, like knowing what I know about this person, I'm like, maybe that was actually true. Like maybe that person actually thought that. But I remember just being like, because there's this, especially I'm somebody who like for whatever reason is like a real rule follower. So I would get very anxious during these times because they're like all these rules and I just didn't want to break any rules and then people are making commotion. I'm just like, why can't everything just be okay so we don't have to get a bunch of lectures tomorrow about how we didn't do anything. So yeah, that was interesting.
Is the same person going to show up in part two?
No, no, it's a completely
No.
different
Okay.
story, but
Is
it's
it
just based on
okay?
Trout Lodge.
Trout Lodge. Yeah. I forgot the name Trout Lodge until you said that. I wonder if it's still there. It would be because I have like maybe like two memories, and they're like basically snapshots. So I don't like of this place, but I wonder if like going back there, I would remember more.
Okay. I'm gonna have to
But
rotate just a little bit. There's gonna be a quick disturbance in the air. But this is gonna make for some great content.
this is good
Um,
content. Yeah.
so all right,
Uh,
anyway, your anecdote.
yeah, my anecdote. Maybe you can. So I don't remember where we were when this happened, but it was you and me. We were, I think, it was something science Olympiad related, the science competition that we have talked about before. We haven't mentioned this, right? When we were leaving and we were being driven by a friend's mom, and we were in a station wagon, in the back of the station wagon,
No, you know what?
'cause like the
This wasn't Science Olympia. This was National Honor Society related or National Junior Honor
oh,
Society.
okay,
We're
it's
coming
like
from like some
something we
event
had
we
to
were
do for
doing.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were sitting in the like the station wagon had like seats in the trunk that you could fold down, and you would like face out the back of the trunk. And so Ajay and I were in those seats, and the she was pulling out of the space, and so we have a clear view of like like the best view of what's about to happen because we're going backwards, and some cars like coming hot around the corner. And it's like about to hit us, and like if it hits us, you and I are the ones that are gonna get crunched. And but we're also just like watching it happen, and we didn't really know what to say. I couldn't muster anything. Unfortunately, you eventually said, "Whoa," just like a very hesitant "whoa," because I think both of us were like, like I don't know. I'm not. I have no authority over this person, this mother figure who's driving us home from. So like, I didn't want to say like stop or anything like that. I was just like sitting watching it happen. But I'm glad that you eventually said whoa because then she stopped. We did not get crunched in the trunk there. But
And
yeah,
it
that
was
was.
also it was a very inappropriately quiet whoa. Like it was like whoa.
I
Like,
remember it being a very hesitant whoa. Yeah, it was like I don't want to like rock the boat too much here, but we might get killed. Right? Like
yeah.
that's that was
This is like
exactly
the
what I was feeling.
opposite. This is the opposite of what we were saying about the leadership that Mahomes may have shown while telling them that he didn't want to. Like for us, the hierarchy was too strong. It's like you want to crash
Yeah.
your car, crash your car. We're not gonna get involved.
I mean, we aren't gonna be in a line of fire, but whatever, we'll put up with it, right? Yeah. I could not. I just like had nothing to say. I was like, "Well, this is gonna suck." Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad you said something. Well, that's it. That was my very brief anecdote. But yeah, I don't remember. I didn't remember that that was probably National Junior Honor Society at the
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it was junior. Did we even? I don't
time.
even remember if we did National Honor Society or if we just only did that when we moved to Rockbridge.
Yeah, I don't know either.
we must have our 10th grade year, right? It's amazing how much isn't it crazy how important those things were then, and now like we don't have any memory of
Yeah.
like I just remember like having to organize a toy drive once and then drop the toys off at this place. It
I
was
don't
actually
remember that
kind
at
of it
all.
was a very nice gesture, a nice thing. I can't claim any credit for it, like it's like one of those things where like you're a kid and you're doing what you're told, and everyone, I don't know, it just makes like childhood CVs are ridiculous because like there are all these things on that were on my CV applying to college, which like now as an adult I'm like I don't like everyone's like wow you did this and it's like no like a bunch of adults like have this organization at my school that I took part of and I was in a leadership position and they told me what to do like that's what being a kid
Yeah.
is.
I'm just looking up on my CV here to see if I have anything from. I don't have anything from high school, I guess.
Yeah, I
So I don't have
don't
anything about
anymore
any of
either.
those. Uh, well,
But I
at
feel
one
like it would
point I
be a
must
good
have.
exercise to like compile CVs of like high school kids applying to college. And I wonder if I could find mine from back then and just like go through it and just be like, well, that was dumb. That's dumb. That's dumb. Like, that looks way
I
better on
must
paper
have
than it
this
actually
somewhere.
was. Yeah,
I
me
still
too.
have like a high school folder. Maybe it's in there, but it's not well organized. So. I
If we
did
ever
look.
have like a
Actually, I did
really
look.
dry content period, we can go over our high school CVs.
We'll just dig through Chris's high school folder on his. Like I have like a AP Gov. I wonder what's in this folder. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, it'll be it. That'll be a episode filler.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Yeah.
Well, that seems like a good place to wrap it. I guess we'll plan on being back. Is next? Well, you said you get busier in July. Is next week? How's that
Yeah.
look for you?
Next week, maybe it may be a shorter episode. It'll probably be like around this time, but we might have to truncate it a little bit. But I should be able to at least do, maybe we'll do like a 40-minute one, or maybe if we're really lucky, we'll cross over the hour mark.
Okay, sounds good. Um,
Um,
well, it was good. Maybe yeah, maybe we'll have actual like real news. I mean, I feel like we do a good job filling this with like interesting digressions, basically. So come
yeah,
back for more.
if you think we are doing that, please comment. If you don't, also comment. We'll love seeing that. Sometimes those are more fun.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Okay.
All right.
Well,
Well,
see you all next week.
all right. Until next time.